Welcome, everyone. We are so glad you joined us for an hour of your day today on this Thursday, and we want to welcome you to Backstage, which is a project of the ResilientChurchLeadership.com effort, a collaboration among many different people who all share a common hope and belief that as we focus on the backstage of what's going on in our lives, we will be able to bring our truer, authentic, and more connected selves into the front stage of our lives, where the real work of our ministry and our important calling is happening. So each week, we've had an honest conversation about how that might happen. The issues that are facing pastors are many, and we've been addressing those for many months now. And even the way that pastors need to address topics that are behind the scenes happening, that maybe are only happening in private conversations and that all of us are not aware of from the pulpit, but are deeply impacting mental health, their own well-being, family relationships, etc. Those struggles and realities of what it takes to thrive in ministry for the long haul, that's what we're all about. So my name is Mindy Caliguire. I work with an organization called soulcare.com. And also serve in the senior leadership team at Glue. And this week, what we're going to be talking about is some really very real and hard issues facing pastors and leaders. I was telling a colleague yesterday that he got the email announcing today's webinar and said, he just started laughing at the title. Let's be honest, we're not okay. And that's what we're calling today's topic. Let's be honest. It is hard. We are not okay. We're tired. We might be fearful. We're concerned. We might be angry. There's any number of things that are going on. And it's okay that we're not okay. It's important to talk about that. So we will be sharing over the course of this hour some stories from pastors like you who are hurting, congregants who've been leaving churches, arguments that are heated, family situations that are really hard, and so many ministry leaders, pastors in particular, just worn out, dirt tired. And we don't have easy answers. This is not going to be the 4 steps to a quick solution. If you're looking for that, well, you probably aren't. We hope you're not. We hope in this call to help normalize the challenges that you're confronted with right now and encounter that together, recenter ourselves as humans in the good hands of a loving God, and identify a few key ideas that will help us take the next right steps. So those are some important things we'll be doing right now. Let me just introduce you to the rest of who's on our call today. One of our teammates and beloved thought leaders in this space, Dr. Margaret Diddams. She's an organizational psychologist and principal leader at the Diddams Group. So welcome, Margaret. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm from cloudy Seattle, but it's not raining today. It's just cloudy. So it's a good day.
Okay, good. It's cloudy here in the Denver area too, which is unusual. So yeah, good. Well, welcome. We're so glad you're here. And our guest today, Dr. David Van Dyke, Marriage and Family Therapy Program Director and Associate Professor of Marriage and Family Therapy at Wheaton College. So I have just been delighted to get to know you a little bit, David, as we were prepping for this, but why don't you say hello as well to our whole community here?
Yeah, I'm happy for the opportunity to kind of talk and learn together. And I'm in a brisk and sunny Chicagoland area. So it's in the mid-20s, so nice and crisp.
Nice. Well, we're glad you're here. And hey, before we get too far into this, I just want to remind everybody that's joining us online, either on Facebook or on Zoom, to please go ahead and like or share today's webinar to help get the word out there. We know that many are struggling with this right now, and we just want to connect with people wherever they are in this moment together. And I think you're going to find a lot of really helpful ways to think about the moment we're in as we spend this time together. Also, we field questions and comments in both environments, and wherever possible, we love to interact with you guys. So please feel free to jump in with a question or comment, and we'll do our best to attend to that during the course of our conversation. So let's dive in, guys. Margaret, I want to start with you. We've heard stories from pastors literally in the last few weeks that are just kind of heartbreaking and stunning, of members of their own families are saying, I can't be part of this church anymore because of the comment you made about what happened on January 6th, or about the election. Maybe there's been other examples. I know we've heard several of these. Help us understand, like, what are we seeing? What does that mean? What's going on right now?
Yeah, thank you, Mindy. Then this is heartbreaking. This is where I want to explain some things, and then David, who is a good friend, and I'm so glad that he's here to join us, will be able to put some more boots on the ground with that. But let's start with just paying attention to and feeling that pastors have just been beat up for almost a year, and it just intensified in the last 2 weeks since January 6th. And let's talk about that a little bit. What's happening is that parishioners are saying, what do you believe, or what have you said in speaking out or not speaking out? And everyone in their churches has expectations for you pastors of what you're going to say. And so you have made someone unhappy. And if it's only one, that's surprising. Every pastor out there is making someone unhappy, and that's heartbreaking. Let's talk a little bit about that. I want to talk to you a little bit about beliefs. And belief is what I believe in. Obviously, that's a belief. But what happens we have lots of beliefs, and what happens is they tend to form a constellation of beliefs. So rather than have hundreds of beliefs, we have a belief system. That makes sense. So I like to joke that for Christians in America, and especially female Christians, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and quilt, for example. And I quilt, so I can say that. But there's this expectation of this constellation of beliefs. And part of that constellation is not only our religious beliefs, what we believe creedally about Christianity, but what has happened over the past 20 years is we have linked those to a lot of cultural and political beliefs. And so what happens is people are disengaging, not because they don't share all their beliefs. They are disengaging because I don't share one of your beliefs. And because I don't share one of your beliefs, I believe that we don't share that constellation. So I'm taking a single belief, and this happens for everyone. Everyone has constellation of beliefs, and people disengage from one another because of one belief, with the expectation that if you don't share my one belief, we simply don't share the entire constellation. And so people are disengaging with their churches based on very small disengagement with beliefs. And I think that's really important for pastors to understand when people are talking about, I'm leaving, I'm out of here, I can't believe you said that, is to not go tit for tat. And David, I suspect you will talk about this more, about that single belief, but hey, what is the underlying constellation? Because we believe in so much more together than the one or two beliefs that are just shredding churches and pastors' hearts right now. And the other thing I want to talk about before I turn it over to David then is how do you build trust, and how do we understand what trust is? And I have some slides I want to put up. So we'll go ahead and put those up right now. Here's what is just prima facie. We all see this, but in the 10 months of isolation, relational muscles have atrophied. Relationships have to be fed. They have to be nurtured. Zoom doesn't work, especially when there is some tension in relationships. And so we don't have the muscle in place to deal with the conflict. So we have this issue of beliefs being crushed in belief systems, but then we don't have the relationship muscle to work toward mending those. So I want to talk a little bit about what trust is and how pastors can focus on building trust. So we'll go to the next slide. Believe it or not, I'm always looking for an alliteration in the psychological literature on trust. Trust is made up of three aspects. It's competence, character, and kindness. And tried to get a C in there, but we got it working. So competence, character, and kindness. So let's go to the next slide and let's unpack these. So competence, do leaders have the right beliefs? And so this is what I was talking before about the system aspect. And we tend to group ourselves with people who perceive we share belief systems. And so if I don't share one belief or opinion, I'm worried that you don't share the entire belief systems. These Christian beliefs are important and how we live in community. But when there is a break in it, at the very best, we get suspicion. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. The other thing is banishment. And so when people are leaving churches right now are saying, I can't go here, this idea is I don't trust that my leader has the right beliefs. So let's go to the next one. And what is character? Character is actually the part of trust that I don't think we have to worry too much about amongst our pastors. Character is made up of integrity, and that is kind of that whole integer as being one, is that what you see is what you get. But also for character, you do what you say you're going to do. There's a consistency and predictableness in character. Now, what's happened in these 10 months is that people are not seeing their pastors in action. So there's a little bit of wariness of, do you do what you say you're going to do, because people don't see what they're doing. So this is, again, part of the relationship atrophy. Let's go to the next one. Kindness. Kindness is really even though there's these three aspects, competence, character, and kindness, right now, kindness is extremely important for trust. So when we think about kindness, it's made up of two parts, right? The leader and follower, because trust, as we like to say in psychology, it's dyadic, it's a relationship. And so on the leader side, it's really important for leaders to show empathy and concern and to not be suspicious. For followers, if they feel that leaders show empathy and concern, they're willing to be vulnerable. And what's really concerning for me is that when we hear these really terrible conversations of basically attacking pastors, that's the opposite of vulnerability. So something is broken there. And what I think is broken is this idea of, I'm suspicious. I'm suspicious that you're not sharing my beliefs. I haven't seen you in 10 months. It's hard to show empathy and concern when you don't see someone. And so what happens is we have trust in general works like a trust spiral. So as leaders show empathy and concern, followers are more likely to share vulnerability. When followers share vulnerability, that allows the leader to show empathy and concern. And so kindness has this positive spiral, but it can also have this downward spiral when you're not having relationships that can build on this kindness. And what the research shows that's really fascinating, and I think apropos for what we're seeing, is competence and character get set pretty early in relationships. Think about times that you've moved and you visited churches, and you're pretty sure within 1, 2, 3 visits, this pastor is not as sharp as I would like, or something like that. But in long-term relationships, so competence and character kind of gets set early on. It's this kindness in long-term relationships that really are indicative of trust. And so as pastors are dealing with their parishioners and also with themselves, because every leader is a follower, who can pastors be vulnerable with, who will then show them empathy and concern? And when you're working with parishioners who are just gunning for you because of something you said, I think it's really important to engage with them on the empathy and concern, rather than tit for tat on beliefs. The tit for tat for on beliefs is not going to end well, as it were. So I want to set that up, that idea of beliefs are in constellations. You can destroy a constellation by not sharing one belief, and then understanding the importance for kindness in trust. Now I'm going to throw that over to David now. Back to you, Mindy.
Well, either way, I think it's David, you'll jump in a minute, but let's maybe both of us just kind of respond to some of what we've heard here. And again, want to invite any of you who are listening, tuning in with us, go ahead and put a comment, a quote, a question into us in your various chat environments. But that definitely resonates. And that sort of tornado of a spiraling negative kindness scenario, I've definitely been parts of those, and those are hard. And I'm so glad David's going to show us what to do about that.
Well, before we get into that, there's about 3 things that jumped out at me, Margaret, that I just kind of want to put a highlight or an underscore on. I think I like the workout piece. I'm not doing that. I have my COVID-19, or what's double 38. So there's a need for workout. But I think about what I learned in my wellness class in college, of that working out is fostering a little bit of rupture, right? So if we think about how the muscle grows, we strain the muscle to a point where there needs to be micro fissures that repair, and it's in the repair that the strength happens. So I get stronger from working out by the little ruptures. And I think when you were talking about that, it made, and seeing the weights, first made me feel guilty that I haven't been working out, but secondly made me think about I think part of the issue is we get concerned about all the conflict and the fights, and we forget that that's really not the issue. It's whether a repair happens or not. The conflict, the difficulties, the disagreements, and I think you were highlighting that with the kindness, is if there's repair, actually there's going to be strength from those difficult dialogues. And I just that really jumped out at me with with the competency of having relational competency to do the repair that fosters that kindness. The second thing that jumped out at me is that in training clinicians like you and I do, we typically want them to be a step further or a lot further than the clients that they work with. And what COVID has done is we're all in it together, that we haven't been able to navigate this to then shepherd. And I think that is just an acknowledgement of this. This is hard because we're trying to help things that we're in the midst of. And I know whenever I try to fix my own family as a family therapist, it never goes very well. It's kind of like the plumber whose pipes don't run at home, they fix everybody else's. That we really need to spend some time, as you were highlighting, Margaret, of having kindness towards ourselves and together to kind of get practice so that we can then shepherd well. And that leads to mutual vulnerability. Sorry, Mindy, I just get excited when I hear Margaret.
No, I love it. I love it. And you guys will both be thrilled to know we've already heard from someone who's raising a question that I think is vital, and exposing even some of the context of the stories, the majority of the stories I've heard of people saying, I'm leaving this church because I disagree with how the pastor has voiced their opinion on a particular constellation-ish set of beliefs. And this person is saying, for many people of color, being in congregations that are majority white, and typically where leadership is white, we may not have as much an issue with explicit beliefs, but we may not feel safe. We've left our congregation because we did not feel safe spiritually, and mentally we're made to feel that we were doing something wrong. And that's like, there's not just one or two stars. There's many stars that presumably have strong overlap, but some anchor stars, I guess you could say, of identity, and wondering how maybe, I know, David, you've done a lot in the domains of conflict and how it shows up in a relational context. And man, that sounds like a situation that's fraught with that kind of level of conflict.
Yeah, and I think my hope would be that the white leadership, the white pastor, the white community would be the ones willing to do the work rather than continue the dance. Where I, as someone that's not a majority part of the congregation, feels responsible for bringing this up and responsible for moving it forward. Actually, it violates trust, even though it's from a helpful standpoint. I'm going through. You can see it's right on my desk. I'm going through a book right now by Edwards, Might from the Margins, and it's really on biblical justice and how we think about injustice, and maybe not even be aware of it, and how we're going. So my challenge in terms of addressing that would be, as leaders, and for me as a white leader, am I being mindful of taking perspective? What is it like for others, rather than me trying to justify or explain myself? Can I be curious? And am I open to listening, and getting into a perspective that's not my own, and not seeing it as a personal thing that it has to be my way, otherwise you're rejecting me, but being curious and going, we can have different beliefs. And as Margaret was saying, we have this shared gospel that we rally around, and we might even see the gospel differently, but can we learn from each other? And be curious of how we read scripture, how we hear God, and how we do leadership.
Yeah, David, that is great. And thank you for your comment. What's really interesting is the importance of empathy and in trust. It's probably right now, it is the core thing for leaders to practice. And it really is heartbreaking to hear you, for our comment here, to be at a place that doesn't feel safe. If any place needs to feel safe, it needs to be our churches. I'm working on a piece right now about what unity looks like, and oftentimes people think about unity as, let's say we have a Venn diagram, and it's kind of, where the overlap is, right? We can have unity where we have quote unquote shared beliefs, but that's not really workable. If you think about it, that actually diminishes unity. What we want to do with unity is expand and create more permeable boundaries around beliefs. In a sense, what we want to do is create a larger us. And in order to do that, we have to not basically shoot arrows at people. And I'm not saying that, please, the comment on what I'm saying here is, people feel unsafe when they feel that they're having arrows shot at them because they don't share this constellation. So we also need pastors to feel empathy for why people don't feel safe, rather than argue about it. That's what I mean. This is not a time for arguing about beliefs. This is actually a time for listening.
Yeah.
So thank you for that comment.
Yes, absolutely. And we share that ache. We wouldn't ever want someone to not feel safe, and that has been your experience. And so we're really sorry for that. David, I know you have some really practical, or at least I hope memorable ways that people could engage in conversations that Margaret's talking about, that would require empathy, when maybe everything in me wants to just shut down that person that I disagree with. Maybe everything in me wants to annihilate their point of view, make them change their way. I feel like a lot of our social media is full of that. Is there a better path? What do you know through looking at systems of people? And maybe can you say a little bit about systems and why systems are an important approach to finding a better way?
Sure. I do this across 2 years, so I'll try to give an elevator kind of overview of, in mental health disciplines, a majority of the focus is on individuals. Within marriage and family therapy, or within systems, we think about problems and we think about healing in the spaces in between, in the relationships. And so for me, it's a really good fit with the gospel. As we look at the arc of scripture, we're created for intimacy. In the garden, we're created, and it's good that we're in relationship with God and each other. We violate that, we're stuck, right? So pathology is this stuckness in relationship, and we might be stuck because we learned how not to do intimacy, or we learned how to do conflict. The idea of sins across the generation is, at some level, we don't know any better. Growing up in a primarily Dutch, Italians were those outsiders in my community. The phone book was V's. I didn't know, I couldn't figure out when I came to college why the phone book was broken and there weren't so many V's in it. But it was because that was my growing up, and that's all that I knew. And I think we have these defaults. We have these ways of being, if we want to talk about it as old self, but we're bound to those, and we're bound to our responses that we don't know any better. And actually, we can't do any better. And what we have is Christ coming in his life, death, and resurrection, that provides a possibility for new relationship with God. So we have this arc of scripture that we see as a relational repair story. And so for me and for Margaret, I work with smaller systems. Margaret works with bigger systems. But we think about stuckness as pathology, and we think about sin and problems being relational. And so then healing is in relationship. It's not an individual thing. It's a relationship with God, and then relationship with each other. And I think we're not okay right now, and we're not okay in relationships. And the reason why is manifold, but when there's a lot of underlying and constant stress, so we're talking about racial tensions, politics, what went down January 6th, COVID since March 14th last year. All of these things haven't been stresses that are peaks. It's been this constant tension, this relative reactive threshold that's continuing to grind on us. And that has an effect on our capacities mentally, and what happens in our brain. We think and feel more intensely. We misread emotions. We respond to others without thinking, in a reactive way. Siegel does a hand kind of example of, this is your brain, right? And so here's your prefrontal cortex, here's your brainstem. And when we're stressed and our level to tolerate things happens, we respond this way, right? We just kind of are screaming, and our limbic system is firing, and it's what happens in adolescent brains developmentally. So it's developmentally natural, although we're regressing as adults to having this reactivity where we're misreading emotions and we're feeling them more intensely, and our tolerance is off, and the slightest thing pushes us over the edge, either fighting and yelling and screaming, or just shutting down, or finding escapes, affairs, drinking, work, Facebook. No, we love Facebook because that's where we are. But but you have this, you have relationships under pressure. You have our ability to concentrate, mental acuity, and this is just me describing me. And lower levels of motivation over the academic break. I had these wonderful plans, and I just read Star Wars books I'm not gonna lie, and didn't do any of my work, and then I feel bad about that. And that just compounds it. And I think pastors are in the same place, and feeling relationships under pressure, having a hard time concentrating, having a hard time getting things done, missing meetings, feeling low motivation. So that's the context that I see, that I feel personally, that I think is out there. And then we have, so how do we respond? Well, I have some ideas of how to have a good conversation, and it kind of taps into the question and comment that we had from someone listening. And it's, here's how you're going to remember it. Cheers, right? It's water, it's Wheaton College. Cheers. And we're going to kind of break down cheers. And the first part of it is, in good conversation, it's being curious. And needing to be curious, which goes to what Margaret was talking about in terms of kindness. It involves listening, and I'm going to read just a rather long passage, but it's from Bonhoeffer, Life Together. And it was when the church was struggling in terms of seeking power and willing to compromise for power. And Bonhoeffer talking about the confessing church of, let's not lose our core belief with the ancillary beliefs of, we need political power, we need all these other things. And so I'm going to read the beginning part of it, and then we'll get to the slide that's up here. But this is around page 97 and following in Life Together. The first service that we owe to each other in fellowship consists in listening to each other. Just as love to God begins with listening to his word, so the beginning of love for our congregation, for each other, is learning to listen to them. It is God's love for us that he not only gives us his word, but he also lends us his ear. So it is his work that we do for our brother and sister when we learn to listen to them. Christians, especially ministers, so often think they must always contribute something when they are in the company of others, that this is the one service that they have to render. You know, whether I'm going to just put my addition to Bonhoeffer of sermon, visitation, those type of things. We are human doers sometimes in the pastorate, and we lose that human being piece. So we feel like we always have to contribute something when we're in the company of others. We tend to forget that listening can be a greater service than speaking. So then we get to our quote here. There's a kind of listening with half an ear that presumes already to know what the other person has to say. It is an impatient, inattentive listening that despises the brother and sister and is only waiting for a chance to speak and thus get rid of the other person. This is no fulfillment of our obligation, and it is certainly that here too, our attitude towards our brother and sister only reflects our relationship to the God. It is little wonder that we are no longer capable of the great service of listening that God has committed us to, that of hearing our brother and sister's confession. If we refuse to give ear to our brother or sister on lesser subjects, secular education today is aware that often a person can be helped merely by having someone who listens to them seriously. And upon this insight, it is constructed in our own soul therapy, which has attracted a great number of peoples, including Christians. But Christians have forgotten that the ministry of listening has been committed to them by him who is himself the great listener, and who works they should share. We should listen with the ears of God, that we may speak with the word of God. And I think about this quote, and it was written in 1938, and it applies more today than ever. And I think about just in my own marriage of when Tara and I are having an argument, I'm always going through, and I know better, I'm trained in this, and I go through in my head making my argument to win, because I anticipate what she's going to say, and I don't hear what she says. And then she's like, what are you talking about, in my response? Because I've planned in my head how I was going to win. We're both firstborns, so that's how we fight to win. But I think Bonhoeffer suggests that's not listening, right? That's trying to treat the other as an object for my own gratification, whether it's my own self-esteem, my own sense of competence, my own sense of being right, or my fear that I'm not right and I need to win this argument. And I think in the church, sometimes we lose curiosity as pastors because we feel compelled to preach the truth. But if we're not listening to the others and how the truth fits for them, the word's not going to be heard. And I think this goes to, Margaret, I think what you were talking about, kindness. The listening and kindness goes together.
Yeah, David, I was struck as you read that quote and our listeners' comments about how important safety is.
Mm.
That I feel interpersonally safe, and that I feel safe in my social group, say my church. And so part of feeling safe is feeling listened to, feeling seen, right?
Yeah.
That I'm not a thing among things.
Mm-hmm.
People want to know that they feel special. And I know people beat up we're all special, whatever. But if we think about it in terms of unique, and I'm seen, and I matter.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing, I think, in this awful time is people, rather than feel safe, there's so many reasons why people feel scared. And as you did the brain, very nice, very nice. It's because everything's running down the limbic system. The level of fear is outpacing safety. And so to get to that safety, there has to be that empathetic listening.
Yeah.
It can't be a debate about who's believing right or how they're believing, because that's just going to be a competition, and it's not going to bring down fear. It's not going to raise safety. And that's really what we want to be doing.
Yeah. And I think timing is part of that, of going slow. As you're talking, Margaret, I think that safety, that trust, that even managing the fear in our limbic system, it's about slowing things down. And time is really weird during COVID. Things last forever and they go by really quickly. And I think our brain and our relationships, we have a hard time managing that. And I think what you're saying, to listen well, to build trust, we have to slow down. And that can be hard when there feels the pressure there. I want to get to empathy, and you mentioned empathetic listening. So the C is being curious and listening. The H is humble, and this is pretty straightforward. This is a Christian virtue. Am I wanting to do something to this person, or do something for this person? And really thinking it in terms of Buber. Am I thinking in an I thou kind of statement, or am I thinking in an I it? Do I see you as an object to meet my need, versus I see you as an image bearer of God that I am interacting with as an equal? And a lot of times we treat others as its. And I think that when we go fast, that tends to be, I know that's what I go, the road I go down if I'm going to be vulnerable, is I see the task, I see what I need to do. Okay, who do I need to pull in to get this done? And pulling them in is about getting the thing done. It's not about how we're going to do this together in relationship. And luckily I've had really good examples, Margaret being one, of doing it differently, and the collaboration, she and I, and how she's helped me see the I thou relationship. And that's part of that humility of I'm in this not to get something done for me, or treating the other as an object, but I'm in this to do the relationship, which then the thing emerges from. And I'm wanting to connect.
Yeah, David, I'm struck by when I said a thing among things, that's actually from Buber's I and thou. And so it's not only when we think about our leaders treating people as objects for their own, am I doing well by in a sense turning other people into objects, kind of giving feedback. But on the other hand, if people are feeling like they're a thing among things, that they're not feeling like they're seen as individuals, And by the way, leaders can feel like they're things among things, right? There's this reciprocity. So I think it's really important for y'all as you're listening is because there's a reciprocity here. Even if you're the leader, you can be feeling this thing among things and being treated like an it, etc. I did want to go back to cheers to the C, that curious. And you kind of touched on this. So it's being curious in relationships, but it's also being curious about your own response and your own body. How am I taking that in right now? How am I hearing you? What is my bodily response to that? Do I feel myself kind of clenching up, or am I in that kind of relaxed position? So it's not only being curious with the other person, but being curious about yourself. And I love what you were talking about. Like, I had all this work to do and I just read novels. Like, but you owned it, that's what you needed for self-care. And if we're going to be focusing on self-care, there has to be this curiousness about oneself.
And permission, right? To even if something got dropped, how am I showing myself grace as well as expected to show others? Thank you. Yeah, I tend to forget the individual. I'm a relational person, so I appreciate that, Margaret. The E is empathy, and Margaret's unpacked this really well in talking about kindness, but it's seeking to understand what the conflict or conversation is really about. So a scholar that does stuff with relationship, John Gottman, talks about there's the secondary emotion, and that tends to be the limbic response. So that's going to be our fear, anger, outrageousness, shutting down. Those are our secondary emotions that are comfortable presenting out front. I love baseball. I go to a baseball game, and if I was to go, "Oh, Alan Trammell, you're hurting my feelings," as I yell from the crowd, there's going to be a lot of social pressure because that's not acceptable. Secondary, like, "Hey, you bum," right? Yelling at him is an acceptable societal response. Being vulnerable, being that primary emotion. Empathy is really kind of looking at, for the other, what's going on underneath. And a lot of the conflict, I think, that I hear in congregations and I hear in families, it's about justice or feeling unjust treatment. It's fear. And I think fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of being overwhelmed by others, which feeds right into the brainstem. Fear of being hurt, or feeling like I've been through this before and I ended up hurt. And so just the little bit of the first sign of this pattern, I'm going to go right into the hurt. But it might not sound like, ouch, you're hurting me. It might be anger or aggression or leaving the church. So how are we listening? In empathy is not just, so what I hear you saying is, all my friends think that's all I say in therapy is, so what I hear you saying is, that's not empathy. Empathy is going, oh, I get it. And it's about underneath here. Am I able to validate? It doesn't mean I have to agree, but can I validate? Can I say, I see you? I get it. You're angry, but what's underneath there? And as parents, if you're a parent, this is a challenge in parenting, right? We just want to say, don't show me disrespect. You talk to me a certain way, right? We want to, respect me. But they're saying something. Do we listen underneath and go, what you're saying is the way you're saying it's not okay, but I hear you, and we can address that. So I wanted to highlight kind of a relational part of empathy, of looking underneath.
Hey, David, you know what? I like to use the phrase, what is the thing beneath the thing, in my head? And, always, because so often people come at us and there's a thing beneath the thing. And what you just said is so perfect about people want to be seen. So how am I allowing them to show up?
Yep.
For example, and that's the take the breath and not get defensive as you figure out the thing beneath the thing. So,
yeah. It made me think of in the garden, right? Naked and not ashamed of, can we really be vulnerable? Can we really be kind of seen and be okay with it? And sometimes we don't want to be seen. right? That's the hard part. But I want to get the next part for cheer is a cheat. It's two words together: emotional regulation. So we have cheer, we have humility, we have empathy, and then we have emotional regulation. And Margaret's alluded to this a lot in the conversations of, even in terms of in the curious part of, am I aware of what's happening in my body? Am I right now, are you aware of where you're sitting and the pressure on your sits bones? Or are you how you're holding your shoulder? Once we attend to those things, we start to notice the aches and pains, or how we're holding ourselves. Or one of the things I do in therapy is I wear a Fitbit. And when there's high conflict, I look at that to really, I can regulate my heart rate of lower. As the increase in the room happens, my heart rate can go slower. And I have some mechanism to do that with my Fitbit. Because if I get elevated while the other's getting elevated, it's going to be a bad news. And so I'm needing to regulate my emotion with my family, with my kids, with my parishioners, with my spouse, with my colleagues, with my boss, or with those underneath me. And part of that is then what activates me, what gets me activated. We're going to need to think about what stirs me up. What are the hurts that are there? How do I show compassion to myself as well as compassion to other? And am I communicating my thoughts through my actions? And I think this is a real important one, is that I see people all the time dealing with parenting. And my favorite one is where they're like, my child is getting in trouble for language and anger management, and I yell at them when they get home, and it's still happening. And I'm like, well, okay, so you're trying to send the message of manage your anger well by not managing your anger well to communicate managing your anger well. And I think we do that. And I think that's what we're seeing politically, is we may have beliefs that are central, but we're not living those out. We may have beliefs that are central in the church, but we're not modeling those as pastors, as elders, as leaders. And I think emotional regulation is also, how am I modeling what I want for others in how I'm relating with them?
Yeah. Hey, David, I as psychologists, we're really big on emotional regulation. Here's a metaphor I like to use with emotions and beliefs.
Yeah.
Is thunder and lightning, or lightning and thunder. We'll say that is because emotions precede thoughts. It's just that our brain processes them faster. So emotions can be lightning, and then thunder, which comes later, is the thoughts. But what happens is every thought has an emotion connected to it, right? There's no such thing as thoughts and feelings. Every thought has a feeling. So there's your Neuro 101 part for today. So what happens is, because we have this quick response, which in this time can be very fearful, that fearfulness gets connected to the belief, and that then we double down on the belief to try to reduce the fear. And so it's very difficult to have that emotion regulation when we part of it, we have to be aware of the emotion that's coming with the belief. And so one of our someone just wrote us, I can see the constellation concept in our church. People are angry enough to leave because of wearing masks, for example. Is this concept new? The idea of constellation beliefs is not new in psychology, but it's kind of a doctoral level. You might not get it in undergrad. So it's not new, but it's not something that you're going to read in psychology today, perhaps.
I think Mark, oh, sorry, go ahead.
One thing I want to say, and you pop in then, David, is this goes to empathy. People angry enough to leave because of wearing masks, for example. I think this goes to the empathy of wearing masks as hospitality. So I understand the arguments of my own liberty, being told to do something that I don't want to do, etc. But for example, for empathy, I have a mother who's 89 and a brand new granddaughter. And I really want to be around people who are wearing masks because I don't want to put my mother or my daughter in harm's way. And I think that gets to the empathy part. But I understand, this is a conversation I would want to have. I understand your beliefs. Can you understand for me why I need to wear a mask and I need to be around people who are wearing a mask, because that risk is just too much for me. Every time I see my mother, I worry that I'm putting her at risk. And so that's what I want people to be doing is, why is this important to some people? And can I offer hospitality around it?
Yeah.
I want to jump in here for a second if I could.
Yeah.
Because by Margaret being so vulnerable and sharing a personal response to the question, which thank you, whoever put that in there. I think that was a great example of what we're talking about today. And it's hard, right? You're facing that. But David, you're using a term activated that I think I know what that means. I'm around enough psychologists and I listen and read enough to know, but I wonder if you could give us like a activated 101. And I'm thinking that as Margaret was telling that story, everyone listening probably either agreed or disagreed with what Margaret was saying. And so I wonder if you could even just use what we just listened to together as we're trying to understand empathy as a way to like help me know what is it like to feel activated? What does that mean?
So Mindy, I think like that when you felt like you compelled to talk right now,
like just now?
Like, yeah, just now. We'll use this as an example. You're one
of those therapists.
Yes, here's the opportunity. It's called Mnuchin calls it an enactment. We get to do it right here.
I love it.
You called out Margaret. I'm calling you out. I give enough to be called out all the time. So, but I think the energy that you felt, like, I want to say something. I want to interject here. That's the activation, that there's a compelling feeling that comes, and then the idea is there, as Margaret was talking about, feeling and thought are together. And so how intense the feeling is how important that thought is. And right now, what you're saying is you want to be helpful to everyone listening. And there's a strong feeling of, I want them to take away something from this. And so that led to the action. Now, it might not have been a thought. You might not have thought through that all. It just kind of happened. Right? But that's activation. And we have that all the time. And sometimes we slow down and go, do I want to do this or not? In the best moments, right? And I think with about wearing masks, of how do you respond to a congregate that doesn't want to wear a mask? I would say we go through, listen, take a very thoughtful stance, humble stance of, I want to connect and understand and be understood. I want to get what's underneath for this person. And then what Margaret did, and so we have that, and I'm not in an active set, I'm not like compelled to convince this person. So we go through the cheer part, and then the S comes, we share. And as Margaret was doing, she was doing the S part of that, of having a conversation isn't just doing all these things of listening, but then it's sharing, and it's doing that of like, I want you to hear me. I want you to hear what's underneath for me. But activation isn't necessarily bad. It's how we respond to it. Are we going to be able to slow down and be thoughtful with it, or does it just come out? My little brother, it tends to come out, which works well for him because he's a comedian, right? So he's very quick. But I would be like, did you really think about that? Because that was pretty offensive. And he's like, I was in the moment, right? And I'm like, oh boy. I think as leaders and with our congregation, we need to slow down and realize when that activation happens, when that compelling feeling happens that I want to share, or I need to correct this, or I need to speak into it. That's what I'm talking about. Is that helpful, Mindy?
I think so. I've seen in myself and in others who I greatly respect. Sometimes this, like, the inability to not drive in ways that seem harmful. So hopefully my question to you isn't harmful, but I've just seen this happen, and I wondered if it's helpful to me, as you were saying, hey, it's basically what you just did. This is what activation feels like. It's when you have a thought, maybe the bolt of lightning created a bit of thunder, and you move accordingly, for good or for ill, but just recognize that that's what it is. And so that was, I think, helpful.
Yeah, that's that curious again. Being curious about yourself and being curious about the conversation that you're having with someone else.
Mm-hmm. It's good. So thank you.
Yeah, and you responded to your activation, I think, appropriately, for what it's worth. So I'll just give you kind of my experience of that.
It's great.
So David, give us the cheers again.
Okay, so it's curious, which is demonstrated by listening, and listening, like Bonhoeffer talks about, really this active first call of listening, like we listen to scripture and God listens to us. We're going to be curious about the other. And as Margaret highlighted, and I got to add to my notes for the future, of listening to ourselves and listening to our bodies, listening to what's happening within us to be informed in the relationship. So curiosity, humility, empathy, emotional regulation, and then we get to the sharing part. So if you notice, there's 4 things that happen before we share in really doing a good conversation.
That's great. No, I find this is really helpful. I hope this has been helpful to all of you who've joined in with us. I think for me, a big takeaway that I imagine in my own soul care and in walking with others will be to really look at this noticing of, that's a helpful metaphor of the lightning and then thunder, and this cheers acronym, I think, is going to help a lot of people really become that self-aware and that reflective. Yeah, cheers. I'll cheers you with my water here. So thank you both for joining us in this, and thank you everybody who joined in. It was great to see your comments in the chat, and we're always welcoming that, and look forward to being with you next Thursday. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Backstage with ResilientChurchLeaders.com. And as usual, resources mentioned, the quote, everything else will be available on the website. And special thanks to you, David, for joining us. And Margaret,
Thanks for
always
having me.
lovely to be with you.
So good
Godspeed,
to be with you
friends.
both.